The air inside the America's Got Talent studio buzzed with excitement as another hopeful contestant stepped onto the massive stage. He was a young man with deep brown eyes and a simple acoustic guitar that looked older than him. His name was Marco, a quiet Filipino man whose nervous energy filled the room. When Simon Cowell asked him to introduce himself, his voice trembled as he replied, "My name is Marco, Marco Aguilar." The moment he said his last name, a murmur rippled through the audience. Some people whispered to each other, wondering if there was any connection to the legendary Filipino singer Freddie Aguilar, known worldwide for his timeless song, Anak. Marco gave a shy smile, clearly uncomfortable with the growing curiosity. When Simon asked if he was related to Freddie, he hesitated and said softly, "I'm not sure, sir. I grew up not knowing my father. My mother raised me alone back in Manila." The atmosphere shifted instantly. Simon leaned forward, intrigued, and gestured for him to begin his audition. Marco took a deep breath, adjusted the microphone, and strummed the first melancholic chords of Anak. The theater went completely silent. His voice, though trembling at first, grew stronger with every note, rich, soulful, and hauntingly familiar. It was as if the ghost of Freddie Aguilar's voice had returned to the stage through his son. Tears welled up in the eyes of several audience members, and even Simon seemed frozen, watching every movement of the young man's hands and every emotion flickering across his face. When Marco reached the chorus, the entire crowd began to sway gently, some holding their chests as the lyrics pierced straight to their hearts. When the final note faded, there was a moment of stunned silence before the theater erupted into a thunderous standing ovation. Simon stood slowly, visibly moved, his usual composure gone. "That," he said after a long pause, "was one of the most emotional performances I've ever heard in my life." Heidi Klum wiped her tears, telling him she felt every word. Sofia Vergara smiled warmly, saying his voice carried generations of pain and beauty. Howie Mandel leaned forward, saying, "There's something about your voice, it doesn't just sound good, it feels like home." Marco looked overwhelmed, his eyes glistening as the audience continued to cheer. Simon then asked softly, "Marco, that song you sang, did you choose it for a reason?" Marco nodded slowly. "It's the only song I ever felt truly connected to. My mom used to play it when she cried at night. I never understood why, but I think maybe it had something to do with my father." Simon looked at him, speechless for a moment. "You said your last name is Aguilar. Are you saying?" Marco shook his head. "I'm saying I don't know who my father is, but music, it's the only thing that makes me feel close to him." Simon's expression softened as he whispered, "You're remarkable, Marco. Absolutely remarkable." The cameras zoomed in on Marco's emotional face as the golden lights reflected in his tears. The night ended with Simon still frozen in disbelief, as though he had just witnessed the beginning of something much bigger than a simple audition. Backstage, Marco sat alone, clutching his guitar. The cheers from the audience still echoed in his ears, but his heart was heavy. The producers asked if he could share more of his background for the cameras. With a deep sigh, he began to speak. He grew up in a small neighborhood in Manila, where he and his mother lived in a one-room home. She worked long hours selling food at the market, always avoiding questions about his father. One day, while cleaning a box of old things, he found a faded photograph of Freddie Aguilar performing on stage, and his mother had burst into tears when she saw it. That was the first time he suspected the truth. He started playing guitar using broken strings and learned to sing from listening to Freddie's old songs. "When I sing, it feels like someone is guiding me," he said quietly. "Like a father I've never met." Simon, hearing about Marco's past, was moved more than he expected. He walked backstage after the show and placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Listen, Marco," he said gently, "if your father really is who we think he might be, you're about to go on one unforgettable journey. But whether he is or isn't, your voice, that's your truth." Marco smiled gratefully, and Simon gave him an approving nod before walking away. Outside, fans were already buzzing on social media, flooding the internet with clips of his emotional performance. Comments poured in saying, "He sounds just like Freddie Aguilar," and "Could he really be his son?" That night, as Marco stared out at the city lights from his hotel window, he whispered to himself, "If he's really my father, maybe he heard me sing tonight." The world didn't know it yet, but a story that would soon shake the global stage had just begun. The next day, the headlines spread like wildfire across every entertainment outlet. Is Freddie Aguilar's long-lost son on AGT? Read 1. Photos of Marco's performance flooded the internet, and millions watched his audition video within 24 hours. Outside the AGT studio, reporters gathered hoping to catch a glimpse of the young singer everyone was talking about. But Marco stayed quiet, overwhelmed by the sudden fame. Inside his hotel room, he scrolled through messages from people claiming to be relatives of Freddie Aguilar. Some were kind, offering support and prayers, but others accused him of lying for attention. He didn't know what to believe. That night, Simon called Marco to his office for a private conversation. When Marco arrived, Simon was already waiting with a serious expression. "You've caused quite a storm, Marco," Simon said gently. "Everyone's talking about you, about your name, your voice, and your connection to Freddie Aguilar. But I want to know, what do you believe?" Marco looked down at his hands. "I believe music tells the truth. And when I sing Freddie's songs, I feel something I can't explain." Simon nodded, sensing his sincerity. "Then let's focus on that truth," he said. "Don't let the noise around you destroy what's real inside you." The next round of the competition came, and Marco chose to sing another classic Filipino song, Bulog, Pipi at Bingi. The lights dimmed, and the audience waited in silence. As soon as he began, his voice carried an ache that only comes from deep pain. His tone was pure and haunting, and every lyric felt like a confession. He sang not as a contestant but as a son speaking to the father he never knew. The camera zoomed in on Simon's face, his eyes glistened with emotion, but he didn't move. It was as if time itself had paused again. When Marco finished, the theater erupted. Simon stood and clapped slowly, saying, "You've just made one of the most powerful performances this show has ever seen." The crowd cheered his name, Marco. Marco. But while the world celebrated, his heart still carried uncertainty. Later that evening, an anonymous envelope arrived at the AGT studio addressed to Simon Cowell. Inside was a folded document, DNA test results from a clinic in the Philippines. The note read, "This belongs to Marco." Simon called Marco into his office again, the envelope resting on the table between them. Marco froze when he saw it. "Do you want to open it?" Simon asked softly. Marco stared at the paper, his hands trembling. "I've waited my whole life for the truth," he said quietly. "But I'm scared that once I know it, everything will change." Simon nodded. "Maybe it will. But remember, your talent brought you here, not your name." Marco finally picked up the envelope but couldn't bring himself to open it. He tucked it into his pocket and whispered, "Not tonight." As he walked out, Simon watched him leave, silently hoping the truth would bring peace, not pain. The screen faded as Marco stepped into the cool night air, the unopened envelope burning in his hand like a secret waiting to be set free. The following week, the tension inside the AGT studio was thick. Marco arrived early, his eyes heavy from sleepless nights. Before the show began, he finally decided to open the envelope alone in his dressing room. His hands shook as he unfolded the paper and read the words that would change everything. "Paternity confirmed, 99.9% match to Freddie Aguilar." For a long time, he couldn't breathe. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered, "It's true. It's really true." Memories of his mother's tears, of lonely nights singing to himself, all flooded back. He felt relief and heartbreak all at once. When Simon came to check on him, he found Marco sitting quietly, the paper on his lap. "It's him," Marco said simply. Simon placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Then you've found your truth," he said. "Now use it. Let it guide your next song." That night, during the semi-finals, Marco walked onto the stage with a calm strength. He announced he would perform an original song titled, "My Father's Strings." The crowd hushed as he began. The melody mixed the sound of traditional Filipino guitar with modern acoustic rhythm, and the lyrics told a story of a boy who searched the world for his father but found him through music. Every note was soaked in emotion, every chord filled with forgiveness. When he sang the final line, "I was never lost, I was always in your song," the audience was on its feet, clapping and crying. Simon Cowell sat perfectly still, his lips pressed together as if afraid to speak. When the applause quieted, he said softly, "Marco, that wasn't just a performance, that was healing." Marco bowed his head, tears in his eyes, and whispered, "Thank you. The cameras captured that powerful moment as Simon stood again, giving him a long, silent salute. For the first time, Marco didn't feel like a mystery. He felt whole. The night before the AGT finals, Marco sat in his dressing room staring at the framed photo of Freddie Aguilar he kept beside his guitar. His emotions were tangled between excitement and nervousness. He had found the truth, but now he faced an even harder challenge: what to do with it. A producer entered the room, holding a phone. "Marco," she said softly, "someone wants to speak with you." On the screen appeared an older man with kind eyes and a familiar smile. It was Freddie Aguilar himself. For a moment, Marco couldn't speak. Freddie's voice broke the silence. "You don't have to say anything, son. I saw you sing. I knew before anyone told me." Marco's eyes filled with tears. "Is it really you?" he whispered. "It's me," Freddie said. "I made mistakes in the past, but hearing your voice, it's like hearing my own soul echo back." The call ended with both promising to meet the next day. Marco didn't sleep that night. He practiced, prayed, and waited for morning to come. When the sun rose, the AGT studio buzzed with rumors. Word spread that Freddie Aguilar had flown in secretly from the Philippines. Backstage, Marco's heart pounded as he prepared for rehearsal. Suddenly, the door opened, and Freddie stood there in person, his face lined with age but glowing with pride. Neither said a word at first. They simply looked at each other, as if trying to make up for all the lost years in a single glance. Finally, Freddie took a step forward, his voice trembling. "I recognized you the moment you sang, Anak. You are my son, Marco." Tears streamed down Marco's cheeks as he embraced his father for the first time. It was a moment filled with forgiveness, understanding, and love that had waited too long to be spoken. They talked for hours, sharing stories, laughter, and memories that never were. Simon walked in quietly and witnessed the embrace. For once, the tough judge had tears in his eyes. "This," he whispered, "is what music is all about." That evening, Simon made a bold suggestion. "Why not sing together tomorrow?" he proposed. Freddie hesitated, but Marco nodded immediately. "It would be an honor," he said. The next night, the stage lights dimmed, and the host announced a surprise performance that no one could have predicted. The crowd gasped as Freddie Aguilar himself walked onto the AGT stage beside Marco. The father and son held their guitars and began strumming the opening chords of Anak. The audience rose to their feet before a single lyric was sung. Their voices blended perfectly, Freddie's deep and weathered, Marco's young and heartfelt. Together, they sang as though the years of separation had melted away. When they finished, the crowd roared. Simon Cowell stood motionless, visibly overwhelmed. Then, with a slow smile, he reached forward and hit the golden buzzer. Gold confetti rained down over father and son as they embraced once more, both crying, surrounded by the cheers of thousands. The world would never forget that moment. In the days that followed, Marco's performance became the most watched AGT clip in history. Every news outlet covered the story of the lost son who found his father through music. From the streets of Manila to the world stage, one headline read. Social media overflowed with messages of love and admiration. Freddie officially acknowledged Marco as his son in a televised interview, saying, "He is my legacy, my proof that music is stronger than time." During the AGT finale, Marco performed a new song called Echoes of Home, dedicated to children searching for their parents. His words carried the message of hope, forgiveness, and unity. As he sang, images of his journey appeared on the screen: the slums of Manila, his audition, the DNA envelope, and finally, his father's face. When the final votes were announced, the crowd erupted. Marco Aguilar had won America's Got Talent 2025. Tears streamed down his face as confetti fell again, but this time, it wasn't just gold, it was every color of the rainbow, symbolizing a new beginning. Simon hugged him tightly, saying, "You didn't just win a show, Marco. You healed the world tonight." Freddie stood in the audience, clapping proudly with tears of joy. In the following months, Marco and Freddie launched the Anak Foundation to support young Filipino musicians who couldn't afford instruments or lessons. They traveled the world performing together, spreading the message that love and music can reconnect even the most broken hearts. During his final concert in Manila, Marco stood on stage looking out at thousands of people singing along to Anak. Freddie sat beside him, playing softly, his eyes glistening. Marco smiled and said into the microphone, I once sang to find my father. Now, I sing to help others find themselves. The crowd erupted in applause, waving lights in the air as father and son shared one last song together. As the final note faded into the warm night sky, Freddie whispered, I'm proud of you, my son. Marco smiled through his tears and answered, I'm proud to be yours, Papa. And just like that, the world's most emotional journey ended not with words, but with a song that would echo forever.